Welcome to the Plant-Centered and Thriving podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Kitchens. Welcome to the Plant-Centered and Thriving podcast. My name is Ashley, and today I have a very special integrative gastroenterologist on the show, Dr. Robynne Chutkan. I am thrilled for you to listen to our interview. And part of the reason is Dr. Chutkan lays out information that is so easy to understand and absorb so that you can actually take what she says and apply it. There were things that she was saying, I was like, oh, that makes sense. Or that's why sleep is important. Or that's why I can't just take a probiotic and not eat any plants, things like that. So I'm really excited for you to listen to this episode. To give you a little bit of background on Dr. Robynne Chutkan. So she is, like I said, an integrative gastroenterologist. She's on faculty at Georgetown Hospital. She's also the founder of the Digestive Center for Wellness and the author of 4 digestive wellness books. One is Gut Bliss, The Microbiome Solution, The Bloat Cure, and a book that is coming out on November 1st, 2022, The Antiviral Gut, which we talk about towards the end of our podcast interview, what we can expect when we get this book. Dr. Chutkan helps people with complex autoimmune GI conditions like Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, as well as those with more straightforward digestive problems. She helps them get their symptoms under control through the optimization of their gut microbiome. If you like to nerd out about the gut, I'm telling you, this episode is for you. It's fascinating. It's phenomenal. And like I said, Dr. Chutkan just explains things so clearly. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Chutkan to the show. Welcome to the show, Dr. Chutkan.
Thank you so much for having me, Ashley. It is really such an honor to be here with you.
Yes, we are thrilled to have you here today. So before we get into all the science and the gut and all those great things, would you mind just sharing how you got into gastroenterology? I feel like it probably wasn't the sexiest choice.
To say the least.
Yeah. So how you got into
What's
it?
a nice girl like you doing wading through all that stool?
Right.
Ashley, when I started medical school, my dad is an orthopedic surgeon, now retired at 87, and my older brother is also an orthopedic surgeon. He's primarily a spine surgeon. So I thought, right, I'm going into the family business. And literally within about 11 minutes, give or take, of my orthopedic surgery rotation in medical school, I was like, yeah, this is not for me. And
Wow.
not trying to throw shade on any orthopedic surgeon's profession, including those in my family, but it was very technical with the mechanics of things. And while that's really interesting, it felt like it excluded a lot of medicine. And so I was able to cross that off the list. And like a lot of things in life, I wish I could tell you that I came to medical school and I knew immediately I wanted to be a gastroenterologist. But the truth is, it was a lot of process of elimination. I knew not only did I not want to be an ophthalmologist, but I couldn't be an ophthalmologist because I could never see the retina. You'd get out the ophthalmoscope and the professor would be like, so you see the retina? And I'd be like, I think I see the retina. I don't think I've ever seen the retina. So it's like, okay, I'm not that good at that. I loved urology, but urology, where you're dealing with a lot of issues around the prostate and so on, involves, typically a lot of older men, and they didn't always want to drop trow for this younger medical student. And so, I found it was interesting. And urology, like gastroenterology, there's a lot of plumbing involved, but it was a process of elimination. I liked OBGYN, but it was a little unpredictable, babies just sometimes sort of popping out and a lot of fluid. So I settled on initially general surgery. And I like general surgery, but I found that the structure of the training program was a little hierarchical. Where I was at Columbia, which, was a great medical school and residency program, but it was a lot of, kind of yes, sir, no, ma'am. It felt a little bit rigid. And for me, being a little anti-establishment, I thought this is going to be a long few years.
Yes.
So I like gastroenterology because it's old, young, male, female, although I will say most of my patients are female. It really is so germane to the rest of what's going on in your body. And particularly now, Ashley, because I'll tell you, I finished medical school 30 years ago, and 31 exactly in 1991. So 31 to be correct. And GI was not a sexy or interesting or highly applied to field at that time. And now, I think about the last 30 years, and how much we know about, the root of autoimmune disorders and even some mental health disorders and cardiovascular disease. I mean, so many of these conditions actually begin in the gut. And if we'd listened to Hippocrates, those 1,000 years ago when he said all disease begins in the gut. And so it's just been fascinating being on this journey, and really my expertise in gastroenterology has been in autoimmune diseases and Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, celiac disease, et cetera. And so now following that trajectory with what we know and what we're continuing to learn every day about the microbiome and how that is expanded out to disorders like Parkinson's disease and depression and anxiety and heart disease and all these other things, it's really an exciting time to be a gastroenterologist.
Yeah, it really is. And I'm so thankful that you're willing to come onto podcasts and be on social media and write books so that we can consume that type of information, because there's so much misinformation out there. So it's nice to have reliable sources like yourself, like Dr. Bolsowitz, that we can go to and really get solid information on how we can heal our gut or strengthen our gut or tap into nature to create a strong gut.
I'm glad you mentioned Will Be, because it's a tiny little group of us. We're hoping to be a bigger club. I met this wonderful British gastroenterologist. There's a conference in DC every year from the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. I'm sure you know PCRM, led by the wonderful Neil Barnard. And I spoke at the conference this August in Washington, and you always meet so many amazing, like-minded people in that community. So I met Alan Desmond, who's a British gastroenterologist who also uses sort of food as medicine to treat inflammatory bowel disease. And then he introduced me to somebody else, and Will and I know each other. So it is a growing community. And again, we're all conventionally trained gastroenterologists, and we all believe in medicine. I mean, I, for one, am thrilled that for people with really refractory disease, we have drugs like biologics and steroids and other drugs, but I'm a really strong advocate for more judicious use. And it's been eye-opening for me to see what's possible with dietary and lifestyle changes as a platform, and how many people were able to get off those drugs either completely or reduce the dose. But again, for people who really need them, it's fantastic that we have them. And, it really is an approach that I think marries these two aspects, like conventional medicine with all the tools in that toolbox, but also incorporating this idea of food as medicine. And, Will and I have these conversations where we're always astounded, because sometimes our GI colleagues will ask us, does that stuff really work? And we're like, changing your diet, eating more plants? Yeah, that stuff really works.
Yeah.
So I think there's still a skepticism in mainstream medicine about, these like very basic, obvious things that people do every day and get, astounding results from.
Yeah, absolutely. I was kind of curious what that was like, being conventionally trained, but also using food as a form of medicine to help heal and put things into remission. But is that like an advantage, a disadvantage? Like, 'cause you almost have to go like a step above to really do the research and go far beyond just what you were taught, which is obviously a lot.
Ashley, it feels like a very privileged position in a lot of ways, and I'll tell you why. Is that there are very well trained, really smart people doing this work outside of conventional circles in a more functional medicine capacity. And the conventional medical community, has this tendency to write those people off as quacks, right? And they don't know what they're doing, and they're not conventional doctors. So for somebody like me who is conventionally trained, and not just conventionally trained, but I've been on the board of our largest GI societies. I was on the governing board for the American Society for Gastrointestinal Endoscopy. I chaired their training committee. I chaired their PR committee. I've been on various subcommittees for the American Gastroenterology Association. I've spoken at those meetings. So I'm in the club. And so for me to say, look, I prescribe biologics in my practice for people who really need it, but I'm having these tremendous results with changing people's diet, and send me patients, so they know that they're going to get from me what the patient needs. They're not going to get a dogmatic, absolutely not, no prescriptions, but they also know that whipping up my prescription pad isn't going to be the first thing I do. And as a result, Ashley, most of my referrals are from my GI colleagues. And I think
Wow.
just like my eyes were opened by these generous patients who were really kind enough to share with me what they were doing and to share their successes and their failures, so that we could be on this journey together, learning what is going to work for their gut. So I also feel like, I have a debt to pay too, forward, back, sideways, to my GI colleagues to say, look, it's not either or, it's both, right? These are
Yeah.
all things in our toolkit. And because these are people, I've been on the faculty at Georgetown since 1997 for 25 years. I know these people, they're like family, and they know I'm not a quack. And I know that they are not narrow-minded. I just know that maybe they haven't been exposed to the kind of patients I've been exposed to and these modalities. So I feel like, as I said, it's a privileged position because I'm able to bring the best of both worlds to my patients. And I'm also able to share with my colleagues and maybe get them, inch them a little closer to this idea that the food you put in your gut matters.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yep. So let's talk about the gut. Your new book is coming out on November 1st, which we're going to put a link in the show notes so that if you want to check it out, you can. Yes, if you're
I
watching it, you
just
can see
happen to
it.
have it handy right here. The Antiviral Gut, Tackling Pathogens from the Inside Out.
Yes.
Little shameless plug there.
Absolutely. So it comes out on November 1st, which again, we'll talk about that also towards the end, but let's get into the gut. And I know that in this book you talk about immunity as well and yeah, healthfulness and all those great things, but we know that the gut plays a big role in our immune system, but what does that actually mean?
I actually started with the gut immune connection. It's the very first chapter in the book, and I think it's one of the longest. And that's because I really wanted to lay the groundwork for people right from the beginning to understand what this connection is. And I'll tell you, Ashley, I went to a fantastic medical school. I went to Columbia College of Physicians and Surgeons. I think it's the best medical school in the world. I was there for my internship, my residency. I was a chief resident there for a year. I spent 8 years at Columbia. But I don't think I really understood in those 8 years, or even in my gastroenterology fellowship after at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York, another fantastic institution where I learned so much about inflammatory bowel disease. But I don't think I really had a good sense and a good feel for that gut immune connection during the training. So the first thing I want people to know is that somewhere between 70 to 80% of your immune system, of the actual immune cells, are located in your digestive tract. Okay.
Wow.
So we have sort of immune material throughout our bodies. There's immunologically active tissue in the adenoids and the spleen and other parts of the body, but a huge proportion of it is in the gut, and it's in the small intestine on the other side of the gut lining. So for a little anatomy 101 here, you have the gut lumen, which is lined by a 1-cell thick epithelial lining. So that one cell is like a razor's edge, very thin. And those cells have these junctions between them. And, when the junctions open up, we call that increased intestinal permeability. So the junctions are pretty tight. And all of that is designed to keep the things in the gut lumen, in the lumen, out of the body, so that they can be carried through to the end of the GI tract, the anus, and excreted. And also to allow digested food particles, nutrients, et cetera, to pass through those junctions to get into the bloodstream and to get carried to cells. So it is a bidirectional, selectively permeable membrane, this gut lining. And on one side, on the inside of the gut, and so remember, everyone, the inside of the gut is actually the outside of the body, because the inside of the gut is this hollow tube that runs through our whole bodies that is in contact with the environment, right? When you swallow something from the environment. So this is this hollow, digestive superhighway. And it's the gut lining that allows things, nutrients, et cetera, to penetrate through, keeps toxins, viruses, pathogenic bacteria out. So right on the other side of that lining, so you have the trillions of microbes in the gut lumen, kind of up against the lining. And then on the other side, you have the gazillions of immune cells, the ones, different T cells and B cells. Some are making antibodies, some doing different things. And as you can imagine, Ashley, there's constant communication across that gut lining. And I like to think of the microbes as air traffic control. So they are the ones who are directing the immune cells what to do. And I'll give you an example of that. There's a class of bacteria called Bacteroides. And Bacteroides are sort of surveying what's going on, with the gazillion microbes floating around in the gut. And when they detect a dangerous virus, they trigger release of something called interferons in the wall of the lining. And then the interferons send a message to the immune cells what to do. So again, if your gut microbiome is disrupted and your population of Bacteroidetes is, in some way off, you can see how that can interfere with the signaling. Similarly, if the gut lining itself is damaged, that can also create a problem. So there is this hand and glove relationship, constant interaction between the gut microbes and the immune cells. And you sort of need all three, right? You need healthy microbiome, intact gut lining, and you need to have that signaling not disrupted in order to have this, I like to talk about the Goldilocks immune response, not so active that you're overreacting, not so underactive that you're not clearing the pathogen.
Yeah. Well, I know this is something that you've talked about before, and this is all so fascinating. So I'm guessing a lot of this plays a role in what determines like how healthy someone is or whether or not they're prone to getting like sicker than somebody else. I'm guessing it's really dependent on their gut, or a big part of it.
Yeah, that's such an important question. And, let me be clear that there are times when things just fall out of the sky, right? And there's no rhyme or reason and we don't know why. But like most things in medicine with how the body works, things are predictable, often preventable, or as I like to say, they're forecastable and reducible. So if we take it away from viruses for a moment, Ashley, and we think about just illness in general, if you are an 85-year-old overweight, hypertensive person with heart disease who's a heavy smoker, and you get cancer or have a heart attack, you're probably not going to have as good an outcome as a 35-year-old marathon runner, plant eater, never smoked, healthy lifestyle habits, right? So we see that when we're talking about things like heart disease, cancer, stroke, infection, whatever malady we're talking about, the health of the host matters. It matters greatly in terms of outcome. When we look at viral illnesses, it's no different. So one of the very big sort of landmark studies in the last 2 years was a study that looked at the health of the microbiome, or really what was going on in the microbiome as a way to predict outcome from COVID-19. And what they found was the microbiome analysis could predict outcome with 92% accuracy. And that 92% number is really important, Ashley, because it was much higher than all the other factors combined. It was much higher than looking at comorbidities like heart disease, hypertension, obesity, whether somebody smoked, how old they were, what gender they were. This one thing, and there were really two aspects, if we drill down a little bit to when we say, well, what does it mean, microbiome analysis? They were looking for the presence of a bacteria called Faecalibacterium prausnitzii, affectionately known as F. prausnitzii. And as I'm sure you know, Ashley, F. prausnitzii is the most prevalent bacteria in people who eat a lot of vegetables, regardless of whether you're a vegan, a flexitarian, an omnivore, or carnivore. If you are a big time plant eater, you have high levels of F. prausnitzii. So F. prausnitzii was correlated with better outcomes. And then another bacterium, Enterococcus faecalis, having high levels of Enterococcus faecalis was associated with worse outcomes. And that's a bacteria that we know can penetrate that gut lining and get into the bloodstream and sort of wreak havoc in distant organs, right? And Enterococcus faecalis can cause postoperative infections and a lot of other mischief in the body. So they found that this analysis of the microbiome was strongly correlated with outcomes with things like whether you were likely to get admitted to the ICU, whether you were likely to be on a ventilator, and whether you were likely to die. But it was particularly predictive of respiratory complications. And so when we look at this and we say, okay, so how can I get me some F. prausnitzii so I can have a good outcome? And you know the answer to that. It's what you're already doing. It's eating more plants. And we know that this indigestible plant fiber is broken down. It's literally fermented by bacteria to short chain fatty acids. And in the book, I call them short chain superheroes because that's what they are. They're really important for the health of the colonocytes, those cells that line the gut and primarily the colon, for maintaining a healthy membrane. And they're also really important for modulating the immune system, for giving us that Goldilocks immune system, not too overactive, not too underactive. And what's really fascinating is that the short chain fatty acids also themselves feed the Faecalibacterium prausnitzii. So F. prausnitzii produce them, they feed them. So there's a lot of synergy there. And, it is at its essence, it is fairly straightforward, right? Now, you can't always draw a straight line with these things. There are other things that could happen. Somebody could get a secondary bacterial pneumonia other things. But these things, again, are dependent in large part on the health of the microbiome. So the thing I most want people to know is that we do have some control over this. And that doesn't mean that sometimes, again, things happen, we can't explain them, just bad luck. But for a lot of this stuff, host health matters. And it's not either or. It's not either you get vaccinated and you socially distance and quarantine, or you do this. It's both, right? This is absolutely complementary to public health guidelines.
Wow, that's incredible. So this is, I guess, kind of a reason why you, Dr. B, encourage eating a lot of plants, and not just a lot of plants, but a variety of plants.
A variety. Yeah. Because when people, one of the common questions I get from people is, well, what probiotic should I take? And I'm like, none, but let me, and that answer varies depending on what you're trying to treat. So for example, for my patients with active inflammatory bowel disease, I will often use a high dose prescription probiotic. It's available with a prescription. It's 900 billion colony forming units. And I may put them on 4 doses of that a day in conjunction with dietary changes. But for the average person who's trying to stay healthy, what you're feeding your gut bacteria is more important than taking more gut bacteria in, because first of all, a lot of those probiotics you get off the shelf, they don't contain the amounts of live bacteria they say they do. And even when they do, the bacteria often don't make it down to the colon intact. And even when they do, they don't really colonize and repopulate in a way where we'll see meaningful change in the gut. But we know that diet can do all of that. So, and again, one of these famous studies, this is well before COVID, and from 2014, a study in the journal Nature took 9 volunteers and put them on a typical Atkins type diet, right? Pork rinds and prosciutto, essentially. And they looked at the microbiome before, during, and after. And after about a week, they rested them for a week, and then they put them on a sort of simple plant-based diet: jasmine rice, lentils, mango for snack instead of pork rinds. And they looked at the microbes, and they saw some of the things you would expect to see. So one of the big things is that the bilophila, the bile-loving bacteria, dropped, because bilophila are around primarily to help digest animal products. So they dropped in the setting of a plant-based diet, and F. prausnitzii increased. But here's the thing, Ashley, the changes were manifest in about 30 hours. So that was
Wow.
really fast. And they saw all these genes being turned on and off as a result of the microbial changes. So those were surprising, right? Like how quickly and how profoundly you can change things, and also the genetic implications for this. So, what's going on in your microbiome is kind of an epigenetic factor. It's a factor that can alter what your genetic destiny may be. And to me, that's just an incredibly optimistic message. It
Yeah.
means even if you have a strong family history of heart disease, or, in my case, dementia, Alzheimer's disease with my mom, like there are things that I can do that could potentially, steer me off that road. So it's exciting, it's optimistic. So that was one important study that really showed us that this stuff matters and it can have a profound impact. And then the other really important study was a 2018 study that I know you're familiar with from the American Gut Project. That was a study that showed that 30 or more different plants over a week is associated with a healthier, more diverse and robust microbiome than people eating 10 or fewer. And again, it's not about the labels, right? Because you can be a vegan, but you're eating the same, peas, carrots, and corn in heavy rotation and a lot of processed carbohydrates. And you can be a flexitarian or omnivore, and you're eating, a little fish or poultry or something a couple times a week, but you're eating massive amounts of plants every day. And so if we look at this, I mean, there are other reasons not to eat animals for sure, from an ethical point of view, an environmental point of view, et cetera. And those are incredibly important reasons. But if you look at this through the lens of, from a health point of view, the really important piece is that we need to eat more plants. That's the important piece.
Yeah. Yeah, because it sounds like it has a profound impact on the type of gut bacteria we have, or what's prolific and what's not. And also, Dr. Chutkan, I can't get past the 30 hours. That is such an
I
immediate
know, right?
response. Yes.
It's incredible. So like we're here doing this on, on a, what day is it? On a Thursday.
Yeah.
And really by the weekend, by like Saturday,
Yeah.
I can change the very essence of who I am. You know, my microbes that animate me, that are there doing all the work, digesting the food, clearing the toxins, synthesizing the vitamins, training my immune system, activating my genes, that can all be moving in a different direction. So it is, you know, it's like power to the people and their microbes.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And to go back to what you were saying with the 2018 study, which I think is fantastic. So it's not just 30 plants, just so that our audience knows, not just 30 plants in a week, but 30 different
Different,
plants in a
different,
week.
absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you for pointing that out. That's really
Oh, yeah.
important. And when people say, oh, that's like so hard, I like to just go, you know, say, okay, let's start with oatmeal. Let's use some almond milk, 1, oats, 2, walnuts, 3, pumpkin seeds, 4, raisins, 5, shredded coconut, 6, blueberries, 7, strawberries, 8. You're at 8. You know, you can do the same thing with a salad. I mean, you can build a salad with 15 different plants without a lot of trouble if you think about adding in some seeds and nuts and also herbs. You know, you think about chopping up a little parsley or cilantro or basil. So it's a little bit of a fun game that we'll sometimes play in our house. My husband always wins. He just keeps adding stuff. But to see, and you know, I have friends and patients who get to 30 in a day. And, you know, Ashley, that very point has really changed the way I give the information to patients. Because for years, I've been telling patients, look, I want you to follow my 1, 2, 3 rule. It's 1 vegetable in the morning, 2 at lunch, 3 at dinner. And now I tell them it's the 1, 2, 3 rule for plants, but it's got to be 6 different plants. The 1 in the morning, the 2 at lunch, the 3 in the evening have to be different. And I want those to be different throughout the 5 days, so that after 5 days, you've gotten to 30 different plants. So
That's
it's,
great.
you know, it really, I think having a number like that, like a goal, just really helps. And realizing that it's not a ton. Like you can eat 2 strawberries and you've done a good job. You've gotten what you need to get out of that. It's not like you've got to eat, you know, 4 quarts of this stuff.
Absolutely. Yes. And if you're a breakfast person, you're like, I don't really eat vegetables for breakfast. Smoothies are a great way
Oh
to still
yeah.
have something that's on the sweeter side if that's what you prefer, but to get some veggies in as well.
Totally. And that is what I do with my green smoothie is I will always use, I use the coconut water base, and I'll typically do kale and collards or kale and spinach or collards and spinach. So I'll do 2 leafy greens, and I have a stringy green, which is usually celery. Then I'll always add an herb like parsley. So that's up to, I don't know if you could have coconut, kale, collards, celery, parsley, I'm up to 5. I'll do lemon, 6, ginger, 7. And then I'll usually do like 3 different fruit. I'll do some mango, nectarine, and, you know, pineapple or kiwi. So, you know, the fruit is, it's all good, but you got to make sure that you're getting a good amount of leafy greens in there too, right? So it's not just a fruit shake, because you definitely want some of that plant fiber.
Yeah.
And that's a great way. So I'm typically getting up to like 10 things in my smoothie. So if you've already gotten 7 in your oatmeal and then you get 10 in your smoothie and you haven't even hit like, you know, sauteed vegetables, steamed veggies, and salad yet. This is just from the oatmeal and the smoothie.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It's and like you said, it is easy when if you just think about it and put a little bit of effort into it, it can be done. It's very attainable. It just takes a little planning. Yeah. So you said something earlier about probiotics, and I kind of wanted to just reiterate what you said, or if you could just explain a little bit more. So it sounds like I can't just take a probiotic and eat maybe the standard American diet and expect to have this beautiful, healthful gut. It sounds like plants, I have to feed my gut in a way too.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like a multivitamin. So there have been studies that show that people who take multivitamins are healthier, but it's not because of the multivitamin, it's because they have healthier habits. But there's not any real data that a multivitamin in and of itself is doing anything. And certainly if you have vitamin deficiencies, if you have low B12 or low iron or low vitamin D, you should replete those. But we don't have clear evidence that for somebody who doesn't have specific vitamin deficiencies, just taking a multivitamin can necessarily do something. We don't really have much data that just taking a probiotic alone is going to shift the needle. And again, for a lot of the reasons I said, not enough bacterial colony forming units, not viable because there's not a lot of testing and regulation around this, and not getting meaningful colonization. But if you look at something like food, like eating a tablespoon of sauerkraut, classic fermented food, about 10 grams, that can give you upwards of 21 different strains of bacteria and we have lots of studies from the Sonnenberg's lab in California at Stanford and others that the addition of these fermented foods can actually make a difference. So I'm always sort of touting food, or if you're going to do a probiotic, don't feed them Cheetos. You got to feed them some actual indigestible plant fiber, or they're just going to die off. They're not going to survive well and thrive on a diet of Cheetos and cheeseburgers. So we do have to think about what we're feeding them, at least not, and not to say that you have to just eat plants all day long, but you have to really think about that fiber content, back to that number, the 30 different plants per week, to make sure you're enhancing whatever you've taken, as well as your native population of gut bacteria.
Yeah, that makes sense. It reminds me of like a literal plant. You have to get it what it needs, sunlight and water and nutrients so that it will grow. And it sounds like that's kind of the same if you are taking a probiotic, or if you want to grow that good bacteria in your gut, you have to give it what it needs or what it
I love
wants.
it. That's exactly right. I'm always talking about, how do you grow a good gut garden? And
Yeah.
it's not that different.
Yeah. And there's so much involved. And I know food nutrition plays a big role in feeding your gut and growing that really good bacteria. What are some other ways maybe we can strengthen our immunity or our gut microbiome in addition to food?
I'm glad you asked about that, Ashley, because sleep and stress are two big ones now. And I've seen them personally in my own life earlier this year. If we look at sleep, and I went really deep on sleep. In fact, the first version of the book, I think the sleep chapter was 61 pages. And my editors were like, you are not Matthew Walker. He wrote that book, Why We Sleep. This is something else. So we appreciate that you're, a gastroenterologist who's really, keen on sleep, but we need to condense this chapter. And the reason why is that there was just so much stuff. And so, here's a simple one. Melatonin, the sleep hormone, is made from serotonin, the feel-good hormone that's made in the gut by gut bacteria. So you can start to see, okay, your gut microbiome is off, is messed up. Your serotonin levels are off and messed up. Your melatonin levels are going to be off and messed up. So again, it's all connected, but the data on sleep is really fascinating in terms of increasing risk for viral illness in particular, illness in general, and bacterial illness, but viral illness, and for vaccines. So for example, there's data that shows if you're sleep deprived in the 2 days prior to a vaccine, a flu vaccine or COVID vaccine, it can be 50% less effective, Ashley, which is
Wow.
crazy, right?
Yes.
So crazy.
Wow. That's fascinating.
50% less effective. And why? Because sleep is essential for rebooting your immune system. So, there's a study that shows, I want to make sure I get these statistics right, a study that shows that people who are sleep deprived can be as much as 76% higher risk of coming down with a viral infection after exposure. And that for every 1 hour of additional sleep you get, there's a 12% drop in your risk of getting an infection. So what I want to remind people is that exposure to these viruses is almost inevitable. We're seeing, right, with COVID. Presidents get it. But what we do see is that outcome, even though exposure may be inevitable, outcome varies dramatically. And this is, again, where host health matters. So virulence of the pathogen matters too, right? There are different strains, and different strains could be more infectious, less infectious, cause more complications. But ultimately, what is going to determine your outcome to a great degree is what's going on internally with your internal soil, what's going on with your gut microbiome, your gut lining, your immune system, and other things too, stomach acid, mucus, fever. There's so much stuff there. So sleep is a big one that can really affect things. And stress is another one. And so I'm not talking about acute stress, because acute stress can actually prime our immune system to, be on alert for danger. But chronic stress really affects our immune system, and it really sabotages that immune system and decreases our ability to fight illness. So there's a famous study of 276 adults where they expose them to a virus that causes a cold, a coronavirus, but not this one, not SARS-CoV-2. And they found that those who reported chronic stress were twice as likely to become infected when they were exposed, and were much more likely to get sicker and to miss more days of work after they got ill. We see it in college students. I see it all the time. in my college student patients where during finals, where they're sleep deprived and
Mm,
stressed, that's when they flare up. Their Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis, or that's when they get sick. Their mono reactivates because it's not just acute infection, it's also latent viruses like Epstein-Barr virus that causes mono, or herpes virus like shingles. So you can be, simmering along, the virus is latent, and then you're really stressed and or sleep deprived. And now your immune system that normally would be keeping it in check now is not able to do that. And all of a sudden you have a recurrence. So you have shingles, or you have mono, or, you have an outbreak of herpes. So again, not an accident for most of us.
yeah. I feel like that's really helpful because a lot of doctors or people just talk about how important sleep is, how important stress is. And it's like, why? And I feel like you just gave us the why. So that was really helpful, especially when it comes to immunity. Now, I know that you're a big fan of nature, and I wanted to make sure that we touched on that before we talk about the book real quickly. But what are some ways that maybe we can tap into nature, tap into the outdoors to also help strengthen our gut microbiome?
We have great data, a lot of it from Japan, about this concept of Shinrin Yoku. I'm sure I'm butchering it, but forest bathing, right? And we know that forest bathing can actually create hormonal and physiological changes inside us. It can decrease blood pressure. It can decrease risk factors for cardiovascular disease. It can increase feelings of well-being. It can improve healing, actual wound healing. But it turns out it also has an antiviral effect. So there's something called the outdoor air factor, OAF. And we've known about the OAF for a long time. There's an article that came out a couple of years ago about it, right in 2019. But we've known about the OAF for 100 years. During the Spanish flu epidemic, it was a phenomena that was observed where people who recuperated inside had a much higher mortality than those who recuperated outside. There was one well-described study where people recuperating inside had a 40% mortality and those outside a 13% mortality
Wow.
when they accounted for other factors, for age, et cetera. And so the OAF, this outdoor air factor, is defined as the germicidal constituent in open air that is toxic to pathogens like viruses. So what does that mean? It means there's something in the air outside that helps to kill viruses. And so we know for a transmission point of view that transmission drops outside. And that's why, when we were sort of at the peak of the pandemic, people were doing events outside were safer for sure. And that is still the case. And that's true for almost any viral illness. But it turns out that it's not just transmissibility, it's also for healing and for recuperating. There's something in the outdoor air that can be very therapeutic. And so when you combine the whole kind of Shinrin Yoku, forest bathing, and all the good pheromones from the trees and plants that are helping to calm us down, and then this open air factor, it can be really powerful. But it's important to keep in mind that these preventative things, staying well hydrated to help flush a virus out of your body, inflating your lungs well, being exposed to nature, having some outdoor air, these are some really important environmental things that can actually make a difference. And we have great scientific clinical data. We have numbers to show how these interventions can make a difference.
Yeah, that's beautiful. There's just something so powerful about nature. And I appreciate you explaining some of that because we know that, but to hear it and to hear why is just, it's all the more reason to go outside and take a few deep breaths.
Yes.
Yeah. So Dr. Chutkan, your book comes out on November 1st. So for you listening, that is World Vegan Day. So I think that's a great excuse to go out and buy a book that is centered around plants. What better to buy than that? But what are some highlights that we can look forward to in the antiviral gut book that you wrote?
Ashley, this is book number 4 for me. So funny, I just happen to have them all here. But the
Oh,
first
perfect.
book, Gut Bliss, was 2013. And then the second book, The Microbiome Solution, which until this book was my favorite, was 2015. The Bloat Cure, which is a little quickie, 101 Things That Bloat You, was 2016. And then this book now, The Antiviral Gut, Tackling Pathogens from the Inside Out, in 2022. And I'll tell you, I really credit my team at Avery, which is my imprint with Penguin Random House, for pushing me. With the first book, Gut Bliss, I turned in a manuscript, and I kid you not, it was, whatever it was, 16 chapters, there were no subheadings. There was no plan. It was just narrative. And they were like, okay, well, this is very interesting information, but we need to, we need to package this up a little bit. And we need to tell people, like, what should they do? What's the plan? What are the actionable pieces? So with each book, they have really pushed me. The information is great, but what can people do? And now it's culminated in this book where the antiviral gut plan, strengthening from within, which is a third part of the book, is really half the book. And I had such a great time writing this because I'm like, I'm going to tell people exactly what they need to do. So it's very prescriptive. And the first part starts with, it's 8 sections. The first one is really building up the body. So what can you do in terms of food and drink, et cetera? And it's much more focused on what you're missing than what you need to not do. The second part is really mastering your mind. And so that is things like stress and sleep and all of that. In the sleep section, I divided up into, environment, supplements, food, drink, all of that. So I make it very, very prescriptive. And then I do also talk about the environment and understanding the environment. And that's where I talk about, open air factor, et cetera, and what can you do there. I have a whole section on supplements and medications. Like, what is the data on this stuff? Is there stuff that can actually help? And if so, how much of it should you be taking? I also, in the building up your body section, I also talk about exercise and, the importance of that. Even if you are somebody who is struggling with obesity, there's still the effect and the impact as an antiviral strategy that exercise can have, regardless of whether you're losing weight or not. Really important to know. So I let the mind body practices in there. I love being able to provide people with the clinical and the scientific data behind it. Like, these are actual numbers. This isn't just, kumbaya, like, let's meditate, but this is what's happening when you're able to activate your parasympathetic nervous system. And this is the statistical likelihood of, this drop in likelihood of poor outcome, et cetera. So it's really wonderful to be able to combine that and then give people actionable steps. And the medication section, I go through all these medications that are potentially deleterious to the gut microbiome, to the gut lining. And I don't just say, okay, stop NSAIDs. I have a whole section, ask your doctor, like, ask them about this NSAID versus that one. What about reducing the dose? What about alternating with Tylenol? So, same for biologics. I wanted to make it as close as possible to if somebody were sitting in my office and I was having a consult with them. And I said, bring out your medication list, or even better, I have people, bring everything in a big shopping bag. And I went through drug by drug. Okay, this one, we're going to stop. Here's why. This one, this is what we're going to do with it. So I wanted to make it really practical and feel like people sort of, had me in their pocket when they're having this conversation with the doctor, kind of pushing and nudging a little bit. So I'm really excited about the plan piece of this book. Now, I do want people to read those initial 6 or 7 chapters, right? Because it's good background information. But I will tell you that the second part of the book, part 3, really, is the part where I feel like I really give people that prescriptive advice for what they can do. And it's not super complicated stuff either.
That's always so helpful. And I know people who see their doctors, because unfortunately, we all can't go to plant-based doctors. We don't have access to that. But for people who can go through this book and get more of the how-tos on how to communicate with your doctor, or just how to think differently, maybe about some of these things, is really helpful. And if it's anything like the podcast, I mean, and it's going to be so much more. It's going to be, I know, just a wealth of information. So I really appreciate you just giving us a glimpse of what to expect.
I know I've made a couple comments about conventional doctors and so on, but I just want to say, I don't think that the criteria should be or have to be, is your doctor integrative? Are they functional? Are they, groovy? Or even, are they plant-based? There are plenty of people who are plant-based and are unhealthy, and there are plenty of people who are not plant-based and are very healthy. I think the most important criteria is, can you have a dialogue?
Mm-hmm.
Is this person listening to you? Are they hearing you?
Yeah.
Is there a respectful exchange of ideas, or are they just telling you what to do? And is some of what they're telling you maybe not making sense to you, maybe not adding up, right? So that's really the important thing, is, are you having a dialogue and a respectful exchange of ideas? Because I do think the best doctor-patient relationship is when the information is bi-directional. I say this all the time. I do a free office hours I've been doing it on Zoom for over a year now. Tuesdays at noon, we're going to switch at the in a couple sessions to doing it on Instagram Live. And one of the things I love about it, it's an hour. I do different topics. The topic we did yesterday was leaky gut, whether it makes you more vulnerable to infection and how. We have antibiotics, 10 questions to ask your doctor if you've been prescribed an antibiotic coming up. And then this part 2 of that is 10 things to do if you've taken an antibiotic. And so I usually chat for the first 20 or 25 minutes, but the second half, 35 to 40 minutes, is a Q&A. And I love that. And I learn so much from the questions, and I'm always blown away by how sophisticated and smart and thoughtful people are with the questions they're asking. And I know other people on the call appreciate the questions, because sometimes people are on and they're like, I don't feel like asking anything, but somebody asked something that either was exactly the question they wanted to ask, or maybe they hadn't thought of. So I just want to say again that the bi-directional communication is super important. And that's why also, Ashley, I'm so grateful to people like you who are putting, I think, really important and helpful information out there and having these conversations. So thank you so much for all the great work that you do.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Well, and thank you so much for coming on the show and just sharing your wisdom. And again, the Antiviral Gut book comes out by Dr. Chutkan on November 1st. So it's coming out soon. If y'all want to check that out, we'll include a link in the show notes so that you can do that. Okay, Dr. Chutkan, if people want to connect with you, where's the best place, or watch one of your IG lives, where's the best place that they can do that?
You can find me on IG at Gut Bliss, GUTBLISS, or RobynneChutkan.com. I've got kind of tricky first and last name to spell. It's RobynneChutkan.com.
Wonderful. And we've included those below, so you can just click them and go connect with Dr. Chutkan. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing this information with us.
You're so welcome. It's such a pleasure.
All right. We will catch you all on the next episode. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, keep thriving.